All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Corning Museum of Glass, both live and online. This is a really special live stream that we're going to be here from the amphitheater in the Corning Museum of Glass, because we have Morgan Peterson, the one, the only, the winner of Season 4 Blown Away. We are coming in on the second to last day of her weekly residency as part of the prize package for winning that program. She has been here with us since Monday, working on all sorts of fun projects. And so we're going to be making something I think all of us really fell in love with during the show, and that is the bathtub and toaster, the Friends, but we're going to make a giant one. So we're going to work with Morgan to make the bathtub here today. And if you have any questions, whether we're online or here in person, please feel free to get our attention. For those online, you can just fill in on the website there. They'll have the link. You can end up tuning in and writing your questions right there. So we thank you all for joining far and wide. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here, but let's welcome Morgan Peterson once again to the stage. Introduce you to the rest of the team. She brought Olivia with her here. Olivia's been working hard all week, not only as a glass-blowing assistant, but also covering a lot of the social media things that you've seen on Morgan's social media during the visit. So thanks for joining us this week. It's been great. We've got Chris over here, Chris Rochelle. Let's welcome him to the stage as well. He is one of our full-time gaffers here at the Corning Museum of Glass and a really technical glass blower. He's going to be assisting, and a lot of it's going to be running the garage, which I'll tell you more about as we go along. But we've made a lot of parts before the show starts, and we're going to assemble all those parts together here towards the end of the process as we make this piece. And then we have Tom over here. Tom's going to be assisting. He's the muscle here today. He's going to be bringing us, really carrying around this piece as it builds in weight. That can be kind of tricky. So he's going to be the heavy lifter for us here today. So thanks for joining us for that as well. And my name's Helen. I'm here to assist, and I'm going to be narrating the process as we go along. So again, field those questions my direction. Whenever I can, I will certainly answer them. We've got a nice team assembled here today to be able to make these dreams come true. Now, I'm curious, though, how many folks out there are not familiar with what the Blown Away series is? A couple of you? Okay, fantastic. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces that have been with us for most of the week, too. But the Blown Away series is a Netflix series. It's a competition that's all about glass blowing. So it starts out with 10 different contestants. They give you various challenges throughout the course of the show. And unfortunately, one person goes home at the end of every episode. So they whittle it down to the final 2 contestants. And when they do that, the Corning Museum of Glass, for the past 4 seasons, have sent up a contingent of glassblowers to assist with the final presentation. The final challenge is always to make an immersive display in the gallery space that they have there on the show. And so it usually requires a little bit more time, a little bit more parts and pieces. So we bring the 3 gaffers to assist those individuals, where typically throughout the season they only have 1 or 2 assistants, depending. So we kind of up the ante, and we're able to help them make wild and crazy, amazing things. And if you come to the Corning Museum of Glass this year, we're really excited that the final presentation that Morgan made is on display here in the amphitheater. So you can see that in person. It's slightly laid out differently because we don't have the same gallery space as they do on the show. But it's got all the parts. All 83 components are all in that display. And you can see it right here in the amphitheater in the Corning Museum of Glass. But to make a bathtub, bathtubs are white. So we started out with a bit, well, not all bathtubs are white. Most modern bathtubs are white. But we're going to start out with a little bit of white glass. And the glass that we start out with comes in bar form. So we can buy our glass in powder form. We can buy our glass in what we call frit form, which are little pieces, which I don't have a jar of right here. Or we can buy it in this solid bar form. Now, when we use solid bar, we're going to get a nice, smooth, and even color out of that application. If we're using the frit product, it's a lot of little pieces. And as you melt them into the surface, they make a really nice color, but they tend to have a mottled effect, kind of a polka dot effect. So choosing the white will give her a much smoother, kind of enameled finish, just like that bathtub would be. But in order to use that color, we need to warm it up nice and slowly and then overlay it over a clear bubble. So that's what we got started with slightly before the show started, was taking a big chunk, almost a full bar of that white glass and getting it nice and hot into a nice little hot Hershey Kiss shape, and we dripped it right over the surface of a clear bubble and then pushed that color up and around that clear bubble to create a nice even coating of color on the surface. So once we get our foundation of clear glass or white, then we start building up the amount of clear that we need to make the size piece that we want to make. Because our clear glass, it is a furnace here. We've got about 1,000 pounds of clear glass to play with. It sits at a temperature of around 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit in that furnace. That's about 1150 Celsius. And in the same temperature range is what hot lava is when it comes out of the earth. So we're kind of working with cold lava in some ways. But we've got this beautiful clear glass, and we can coat lots of layers of that clear. And then when we blow this form out, it'll still look solid white, but we only had to use a small amount of the expensive color and a little bit more of the cheaper clear to make that same density of color. So I think Morgan is just prepping some of the things that she'll need for later on. These bathtubs and the toaster, they're friends, and they're based on one of Morgan's best friend back in Seattle, and the two of them get along like a toaster and a bathtub, she says, which can be sometimes good, sometimes bad, I guess. But I know the friend she's talking about, and she's amazing, so I would think they would both be bathtubs together. Yeah, very lovely. Both be toasters? Yeah. In the hot shops. Oh, okay, the hot shop's the bathtub. There you go. That is a pretty good metaphor. So now we've got these little characters. They are kind of characters, and they've got cute little faces on them. So we're going to use rods of glass to kind of paint those faces onto the surface of the characters towards the end of the process. Now, luckily, that is another piece that's here on display at the Corning Museum of Glass, as we have an entire area dedicated to Blown Away. So it has one piece from each contestant that was on the season 4, and she was able to put the original bathtub and toaster on display here at the museum. So that's another thing you can see if you come here to visit. We've got both of those on display. Yeah, that's lovely. She says we do everything together, so I wanted her to be in the museum too. That's lovely. But it really is a great display up on the West Bridge. It's got not only the pieces from the season, we also have some great videos and other literature up there, so you can learn a little bit more about the show. If you're not familiar, feel free to check that out up here on the West Bridge. So Chris is working towards gathering up the different layers of glass. We call that the act of gathering. That's how we pull glass from our furnace. That furnace has about 1,000 pounds, all in a big ceramic bowl we call a crucible. And we do keep that hot and running all the time, so that glass is readily available at any time. If we were to turn that furnace off for some reason, we would need to pull all that glass out of there, because the glass and the material the furnaces are made from, they do expand and contract as they heat and they cool. So if you try to cool them too quickly or even just together, the glass is going to shrink at a different rate than the ceramic crucible that it's in, and it'll end up cracking that whole furnace into pieces. So you need to empty the furnace, let it come down really slowly, and do the reverse when you turn a furnace on. So we go back into that furnace to wind the glass onto the surface, being about the consistency of honey. It's really easy to add to the surface of the bubble. Yes? Oh, what is Morgan's favorite thing to make out of glass? Morgan, do you have a favorite thing you like to make out of glass? I don't think she heard me here yet. Just a second. Morgan, one of your adoring fans here would like to know, what is your favorite thing to make out of glass?
Mistakes.
She said mistakes, but that's kind of a joke. But in some ways, I would have to agree with you. You have to make mistakes to figure things out.
Like, you know, the first time we made this was on the show. So the first time I made this was on the show, so it was like, you know, like, oh my God, how do we do this? I thought about things I would do if I was put on the show, and this was an idea, but like I hadn't made it yet. So making it the first time, I was able to figure out how to make it better and how to make it cleaner and what you know, technical aspects I can use outside of the hot shop, which I'm well versed in the cold shop, to make it really nice and clean and a cohesive piece of artwork. So I think my favorite object to make, one of my favorite things, is probably the razor blade. But I really have been enjoying making the toasters today and the tub. So I don't know, they're fun. They're all fun.
Glass is just fun.
It's fun. So, I mean, I'm a very stubborn person, so if I don't like something, I won't do it. So that's why it'll be 24 years this summer that I've been a glass blower. So I'm still here, still doing it, so I like everything we get to make.
That's a good answer.
Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much. Awesome. Yes, glass is very difficult. It is a very challenging material, and when you see objects in galleries, in museums, it's not generally the first version of something. You know, you've got to make a lot of mistakes to figure out how things work, and it's usually the second, third, fourth, maybe the 100th piece that you're seeing in those final displays. Yes? You're right. When you look on that nice big gather, you can see the layer of white embedded inside that big layer of clear. And this is why we need to build up lots of glass, and then when we blow it up, there will be a thick, clear layer on the outside, but hopefully we'll get it just the right thickness that you won't really see that thick layer of clear as much. But that's one of my favorite things to look at when you first gather and you get that glow of the color on the inside and the optical qualities of the hot, fresh glass on the outside. It's kind of fun to see all those layers. Now with this next gather though, as we go back into the furnace, since this is clear, we won't really see the difference between the second layer of clear and the third layer of clear. They'll kind of melt in together and create one. But we should still, of course, see that thick layer of white. But great observation. Yes? Ooh, is there any equipment here at the Corning Museum of Glass that Morgan hadn't had a chance to use before? Now, I would say with 25 years of experience and the experienced studios that she has worked in throughout her career, I'm guessing that we've got most everything that everybody else does. It's just maybe a little bit more space, a little bit nicer equipment in some aspects. The shop, she said this multiple times in her visit, the shop is very clean. We take really good care of our shop. But most studios tend to have the basics. You need to have a furnace to melt your glass. You need to have the reheating chamber to be able to remelt the glass, keep it soft and malleable as you're working, and to keep that glass from getting too cold and cracking as we work. Most studios also have a bench. Now we have a funny amount of tools because we not only have a lot of toys here, but we also have acquired a lot of tools from the old Steuben factory, from a lot of the other local glass makers. We just end up being an accumulated place for all kinds of fun historical tools. So there might have been maybe some sculptural tools that she could have taken advantage of here, but she also brought some of her own tools. And most glassworkers will have or travel with their own tools because they're pretty much your hands. You can't touch the material, so you have to use tools to make that happen. And when we do so, generally, we get really comfortable with the tools that we own ourselves. But look at that big gather. Chris is getting his workout here today. But that was a beautiful last gather. Maybe not a last gather. Last gather, okay. I wasn't sure how big we were going. Yes?
Wait, when the extra...
So the question was, when we drain the glass into the buckets, does that end up making a Prince Rupert's drop? So when we were pouring in that bucket, we're kind of straining off some of the excess glass that we don't need, and it makes the gather a nice even gather. We do reclaim that glass, putting it back into our furnace eventually, so we do try to reclaim as much clean, clear glass as we can. But if we're making a Prince Rupert's drop, that glass is really hot when we pour it into that bucket, but it tends to be big blobs and kind of keeps flowing onto itself, so it's not going to create that Prince Rupert's effect. Prince Rupert's drops are usually just a small drop of glass that's dropped into water, and that will create kind of a teardrop shape with a little tail. So it's just too much glass coming off of that to make a proper Prince Rupert's. Really big blobs kind of look like really big blobs. When they hit the bucket there, they're actually water in that bucket. So that blob of glass is going to break into tiny little pieces. So they won't even stay as a blob because we've got water to help contain that glass and to help it break into the smaller pieces, which are easier to recycle. But they just did a lot of great shaping here. You might have noticed every time we come from the furnace, we go back to the bench and we use a wooden block to cradle that glass inside of. Those wooden blocks are made of cherry wood, which is a really wonderful wood to use because it has a tight grain pattern. They end up burning evenly on the inside, not creating ridges or irregularities that you might find in non-fruit woods or things like pine. So we can use these only because they're also wet. So that nice tight grain pattern also holds lots of water, allowing steam to form on the inside of that tool. So steam becomes a non-stick surface, allowing us to roll and manipulate that glass easily without leaving wood ash or texture on its surface. The wooden blocks, though, are fairly limiting. There's only a certain amount that can be shaped with that initial block, so we tend to also gravitate towards this hand pad here. Now this hand pad is made of newspaper. I think it's one of the more surprising tools that we use, but with about 5 to 10 sheets of newspaper folded up, we can get a really nice flexible shaping tool that also works on that layer of steam. So with that steam, with the paper, you're going to see Morgan or Chris or Tom, whoever ends up holding the pipe at the time, they might use that paper to help shape the glass. Now our reheating furnace, this is how we shape our objects. With heat comes softness. So we just make the glass hot where we want to see it change and keep it slightly colder where we don't want it to change. Being in the early stages of shaping, we want to make sure that we're still working really hot. And you're going to see some great teamworking happening here because as Morgan is watching the bubble and helping contain it with the hand pad, Chris is rotating the pipe and Tom is blowing into the end of that pipe. So we can add inflation, and having an assistant blowing into the pipe for you makes it a lot easier to guide that bubble in just the right way. Olivia is also being an excellent assistant here by putting a little water on the paper, maybe using a paddle to shield Morgan from the heat, and really just being the orchestrator of all things bench here at the edge of the studio. You got a question? So why do we use paper? And I didn't catch what your other guess is. Hide? Oh, okay. Oh, cotton. Okay, great. Yes, so we use paper as opposed to fabric because fabric tends to have kind of an open weave to it. So if you put layers of fabric together and you put the hot water onto it, the steam's actually going to travel down through that hand pad, and you would end up feeling that heat. But with paper, it has such a tight kind of staple length and weave to the paper that the steam doesn't work its way through it. So it's, a wet hot pad is super dangerous, but a wet piece of paper, newspaper, doesn't end up being as dangerous. You know, a magazine might work, but they tend to be really glossy and have a lot of other chemicals on the surface of that paper. So we try to gravitate towards more pure paper that has minimal amount of color. That's getting really hard to do these days with newspapers. It's actually getting hard to find newspapers in general. But yes, I think you could do it, but it might end up burning some things to the surface of the glass that would be undesirable. Yeah, great question. Thank you. So look at this teamwork, beautiful job. They're cutting in a nice tight constriction line at the top of this bubble, and this will help remove this object from the blowpipe at the end of the process. A lot of objects are traded to another iron, what we call a punty, and then it gives you access to opening up the top half of the form. But Morgan has found that with these very large bathtubs, she's only made a couple of them. The one on the show is maybe only 5 to or maybe 10 inches big. But these, as they scale up, she was finding that the shape really wasn't doing what she wanted by trying to transfer it over onto a punty and open up that shape. So instead, we're never going to remove this from that iron. We're going to leave it on this pipe the whole time, cut in a tight constriction line, break it off at the end of the process, and then the top of the bathtub will actually be cold worked. So it'll be cut and ground and polished into that nice curve that you can that she wants for the bathtub shape. And this is a very common approach, not only to glassmaking in general, but the way that Morgan really loves to work. All things don't have to happen in the hot shop. As much as we all love to blow glass and we can do amazing and beautiful things, there is a tendency that when you start adding bits and building things and building them bigger and bigger and bigger, they tend to get a little more cartoony. Sometimes things get a little soft and squish and they're kind of hard to line up in just the right way. So she's a big fan of making lots of components, lots of parts and pieces. And then when everything's at room temperature, she can kind of look through the pile of parts and start assembling things together. And then if you have 4 pieces and the 5th one was a little off on size, well, then you don't need to use that 5th one. You know that those 4 are the good ones. Where if you're doing everything hot, you're kind of dedicated to whatever you got in the oven, you put it all together, there's no going back. So she'll do a lot of things that are later formed in the cold shop or in her studio, grinding, polishing, getting the fits just right, and then gluing them together. Get a question? That's a great question, too. Is it dangerous for our eyes to be looking into that furnace? Not really. Now, we all do have safety glasses on, or regular glasses for those that need them. But we have glasses on mostly for the heat. The radiant heat can dry your eyes out and be kind of uncomfortable. But mostly we're using those glasses to protect us from any broken glass. Because glass, when it cools, it shrinks. And if it shrinks too suddenly, it can kind of crack and pop and send little pieces of glass flying all over. Or if an accident were to happen and we dropped a piece and it kind of shattered and kind of showered us all with glass, we want to make sure our eyes are well protected. Now, if we're using a lot of torches, and if you come here to the Corning Museum of Glass, we have a flame working demonstration that happens on a daily basis. And they have a torch that's mounted on the table that uses both gas and oxygen. It's really hot, it's really bright. So they do wear special glasses called didymiums. And those will help smooth out or filter out the bad light and give them a better view and protect their eyes. Great question. I want to bring your attention back. Look we're already changing that big, beautiful bubble into the flattened form that we have for our bathtub shape. So again, as we're building this, remember it's kind of the bottom 3/4 of that bubble that's going to be the final product, and the top section will all end up being waste glass in the end. So she's using a bit of cork. Cork is a really wonderful tool. Just like our paper, just like our wood, we get a little carbon layer on the surface, but these don't require water. So we can use them to flatten things and use them fairly aggressively to shape things. And as long as we keep them moving, they're not going to end up leaving texture or leaving wood ash on the surface. So you see a lot of these tools being used. Yes? Yes, the bucket shaped, you mean the blocks here at the beginning? Yeah, let me see. This tool here? Yeah, these are the wooden blocks that are made of cherry wood typically, some sort of fruit wood. We use a lot of cherry here in the United States, and they use a lot of apple wood in Germany. It just kind of depends on what's prevalent. But those, those are made of wood and generally a tight-grained fruit wood. Yes? Scale size? Well, this is pretty much setting the scale, right? So this will be the size. We're not going to blow this up anymore. At this point, we'll just start, once she gets that shape that she wants, we'll start putting on the little face and the winky eyes, and that's going to be the biggest part of the bathtub. And then we made a toaster earlier today that was probably maybe 10 to 12 inches square, give or take, well, rectangle, but about that. Unfortunately, a lot of these pieces, we again won't see their final iteration. So you'll have to keep an eye on her social media and her website, because we will put on a lot of images of things that we've done here, and we'll put them online, and we have been doing that throughout the week. Olivia's been getting some great images and things throughout the week as well, and posting those right on Morgan's site. But some of these pieces might take months to finish. Lots of cold working, lots of other approaches to the material, and we still have to ship them all the way back to Seattle for her. She'll fly home without them, and we'll box them up and send everything that she made during her residency. So she's just going to have Christmas someday and be able to open up all these boxes and have lots of work ahead of her to be able to make some beautiful things out of these parts and pieces that we've been working on. So fun, she says, so fun. I'm just checking in on the team. Sometimes they like to have doors or something. They might need my help, so I'm just checking in if they needed anything. You got another question? That's another great question. You might all be noticing that we're seeing the inside of our furnace on occasion every time they go and reheat. Now, this gives me an opportunity to talk a little bit about glass chemistry, because what's protecting a standard camera, we don't have a high temperature camera in there, we have a regular camera, and it's behind that unit, and it's looking through a very special window. So windows are typically what soda lime glass. Now, soda lime glass is just one big family of glasses. But if you change the chemistry of glasses, you can make them do different things. So can anybody tell me what glass in general is made out of? Sand, excellent. Now, sand by itself, though, is going to take a really high temperature to melt and won't turn into a nice glass that can be formed into things. So sand typically needs to have a flux added to it. Flux is lower melting temperatures. So for our glass, the soda lime glass, we're using the silica sand soda ash as a flux. And then we have a stabilizer called limestone. Those three materials are called batch, but if we tweak the formulas, we can make them do different things. So standard windows would be the same kind of glass that we're playing with. So standard windows would end up cracking when we turn the furnace on and melting when it reached temperature. So instead, we have what's called fused silica back there. And fused silica is a high temperature resistant glass that's optically clear and thermally stable, meaning it doesn't expand and contract, so it won't crack. It's not going to melt at the high temperatures of that furnace, and we can get that great optical view inside. But it's a specialty glass that was developed by the Corning Corporation back in the 1930s, and it wasn't until we went up into space and needed ways to see in those really challenging atmospheres that they started to use that particular type of glass. But this is where the bubble turns into a character. So she is going to start dropping little drips of glass onto the surface of this bubble, and those little drips will be eyeballs, little pink cheeks, and a little mouth, like a little round mouth. So she is using one of those torches I was talking about that has the really hot flame, both gas and oxygen, to be able to spot heat just the very tip of that rod. And when it's hot enough, it'll just drip right to the surface, and then she can torch it and give it a little tap, and that'll flatten it right out. Now you notice that she put a glove on because she's working above a really hot bubble, right? That's a lot of radiant heat coming after her. So while glass blowers typically don't wear gloves on a regular basis, a lot of times for sculptural work and things of this nature, you'll put a glove on to help protect you. I also noticed Olivia going in and shielding her from that heat using a wooden paddle. And that's another common thing you'll see in glassmaking, just using wood to hover between the gaffer and the object at hand, and that'll help make that process a little bit more comfortable. You got a question over here? Sorry, it's been a while before I answered you. Yeah. Oh, you are so observant. That is fantastic. She said, well, why is it that you put water on the newspaper and then you put it on your glass, but we were also told that if we put water on the glass, it'll end up cracking it. So it's a temperature game is really what it is. If we were to take a really wet newspaper and put it on the surface of this bubble now, that bubble's a little bit colder. It's stiff. It's not moving around as much, right? So if we put a wet newspaper on there, we would run the risk of cracking the surface of it. If we're in our fresh hot glass and it's all wiggly and moving and we use that newspaper and it has enough heat, then we get a layer of steam that forms. So we're not really putting water as much as the steam is kind of pushing between the paper and the glass. And so if it's really hot glass, we can use the wooden tools, we can use water, and if it's cold glass or more stiff glass, we want to avoid cold tools and water and things that would crack the glass. So it's just a temperature difference. Does that make sense? Awesome. Great question. Great observation. Thank you. Yes? The canes? Yeah, that's what she's using. They're rods of solid colored glass, and when you pull glass into long strings and chop them up, you do call them canes. But we do call these, canes or rods. And we've got a beautiful pink color, we got a black, and we've got a white. So now she's adding the black, which would be, of course, the iris of the eye, I think. And before we got started today, Morgan was looking for some inspiration. Sometimes we print out pictures and things to be able to reference. And so she's made a lot of googly eyes. I mean, anything with googly eyes is going to be awesome, right? So she's made a lot of things with googly eyes, but she said, I really want to take this a little further in that step. I want to make it as cute and sparkly as possible because this reminds me so much of my friends. I really want this to be really fun. So she printed out a bunch of pictures of different stylistic eyeballs that she saw in cartoons and settled on one that has a big white in the background, a nice big black iris, and then 3 little dots. So it's like one little white dot and then 2 tiny ones next to it. So it's the eyeball with a little sparkle in its eye. So super cute. And I think maybe one of the first times she's made that particular style. But I love how this is coming together. It's such a big bathroom. It's going to have such a cute little face on the front. It's so adorable. One's looking up, one's looking down? Nice. I do that all the time. Got the eye on all angles at once. Perfect. I was going to say, do we have any online questions for us here, Brady?
Someone's curious what we do with waste glass.
Yeah, what do we do with waste glass? That's a great question. Thanks again for Brady's going to be answering all those online questions and anything that he might not be able to answer. It'll feed right to me so I can do a live stream as well. So feel free to field those as much as you want there online. But what do we do with our waste glass? Now, we do try to reclaim as much clear glass as possible, but we only want to preserve the nice clear tank that we have. So we don't want to put colored scraps, we don't want to put dirty scraps, we don't want to put things that have metal and floor sweepings and stuff back into our furnace. So and while we do recycle a lot of the nice clear glass, all the colored stuff, all the broken pieces, those get given off to aggregate companies in the local region. So they tend to crush them up and put them into things like concrete or those beautiful countertops that you see that they'll carve down through it and polish it up and have little pieces of glass. You can tumble anything that doesn't fit into clean recycling categories. That's kind of the problem as well with our glass. It doesn't match the pickle jars and the soda bottles and things that would be in a clean category of recycling. So that while it could be remelted, you have to match chemistries. We talked a little bit about chemistry of glass. Ooh, that is a great shot on the action of adding those little dots. Nice video work, Alexis. So we tend to, yes, they can take that glass that doesn't fit into recycling categories. It can be pulled into thin threads to make insulation. They can tumble it into tiny little spheres, and those little spheres are thrown into paint along the highway. So you'll see all those little sparkles that happen when you're driving down the highway. That's little spheres of glass that are embedded in the surface of the paint. So we like to say that all the roads around here are paved with all of our mistakes, so you can kind of see the glitter on your way in and on your way out. But great question. I think I saw another hand somewhere up at the top. Where does Morgan draw inspiration for these projects? For new projects? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Let me come a little closer. New art projects. All right. Now, inspiration, man, can come from a lot of different places. I know Morgan is a huge fan of true crime. True crime. I said that backwards. But true crime. So she loves anything involving, insidious acts and murders and all kinds of fun things. So whether that's appropriate to say, I think she would agree with me. That's it's the fascination of the human interaction and the things that happen, especially in pop culture and a lot of references. So she pulls a lot of inspiration from her work, from pop culture, from true crime, and also just a lot of personal stories as well. So she has a lot of connection to the drag community, and throughout the season of Blown Away, each challenge that she did actually has a homage or a reference to one of her favorite drag artists, and the final installation was also a homage to her employer, Dale Chihuly. So she's bringing in some of those personal stories and the things that she really loves. I know that there's another one body of work that she's done because of one of her good friends, and the good friend's son passed away due to some addiction issues. So there is also a level of those kind of personal stories in her work. But inspiration really can come from anywhere. And so I think Morgan is one of those artists that really just is an observer of the world, and really feels things deeply and connects with people deeply. And so to draw those kind of things into her work, they may not be an obvious connection in the final object, but when you hear the stories behind the work, that's really where those elements start to come into play. But again, I'd love to invite you to check out her social media, Zucchini Noodles and Beef. You can find that link on our website as well, because we have some great information about Morgan, some of her work, and her website. She has some descriptions behind the work that she makes, and each one of them is very unique. And so I highly encourage you to check that out and support her in her artistic endeavors. Yes? How much does that weigh? It weighs pretty much the same amount as what we pulled it out of the furnace. I would say about 10 to 15 pounds of glass. But since it's bigger and it's further away, it's going to feel exponentially heavier every time you kind of hold it far away from you. So Yes, 10 pounds of glass can get really heavy after a while, carrying it around far away from you. But it's blown out pretty big, and I'm guessing it's fairly thin as well, probably about 1/4 to 1/2 an inch. So it's not as heavy as what it could be if we made it a lot thicker. Yeah. But you can see there's those little winkies, those little sparkles, the tiny little dots of glass. She doesn't want to just torch and get it super hot. It'll all melt flat. So one of the things that's really nice the way that she's doing these eyes is she's leaving them just a little bit dimensional. So they'll really stand off the tub and really have a life to them on the surface. So I see the pink in her hand. So now we're getting down to the cheeks. They've got like rosy little cheeks. They're so cute. We actually made, I guess we could show you the piece from yesterday. So for those of you who were with us here in person, we did a Blown Away Day. Have you even seen this yet? So we did a Blown Away challenge. We had 3 contestants that were here along with Morgan, and this was the piece that she made in collaboration with the guests that came. We kind of narrowed down to their favorite pieces of the episodes and allowed her to have a little creative freedom on how to join some different things together. So this is an example of how those little faces come together, and I'll show you. Can you show that real quick for our online audience? You can see that cute little toaster in the front. And so those little, now this isn't the sparkly eyes as much, but this was the collaboration piece that we did yesterday for that Blown Away Day. So cute. But now she's making those little pink cheeks on the bathtub. Yeah, she says, first attempt at that mushroom. Like, she made a mushroom on the show, but it was a new version, new time. Like she mentioned earlier, making mistakes is also part of the process. So I'm not saying that was a mistake by any stretch. But, when you're on the show especially, you only have one chance to do it. So almost every gaffer on that show, if you talk to them, they'd say, I would love to do that piece again. Because you're in a new studio, you're under a time constraint, you got assistants that you may not be familiar with. There's a lot of stress involved in the whole thing. So not everything really works out like you would expect. Now it makes for some really dramatic, fun, drama on the show too, when things are breaking and things aren't working out. But it's just a terrible, terrible thing for glassmakers to put all this love and sweat and tears into things and have them not work out. But even when they don't work out, you're still learning from that experience and being able to apply that knowledge to the next time. And even if you don't make the same thing again, you can take parts and pieces of that. So every eyeball she's done, she learns a little something different about how to make an eyeball, and goes from a googly eye to a cutie little sparkle eye, and just by changing that methodology just a little bit. Yeah, next time maybe a little star. We were looking at pictures that had actual stars, and we thought, well, we only got to have an hour for the demo, so we might not have time to workshop that more complicated eyeball. But, she could get down to the point where if she's producing these fairly regularly, you could even, make a bunch of eyes just separately and have them like little marinis and have them on hand and ready to just attach to your piece. Use it as a part and component as opposed to doing it hot up against the bubble in place. There's so many ways to approach glass making. Yeah, so many ways. But that's what's really one of the fun things of hosting an artist like Morgan and bringing in guest artists here at the museum, because we have an opportunity to not only help them bring their visions to life, but we also have an opportunity to learn from the processes and the experience that they have as gaffers as well. And Morgan's been working out in Seattle since graduating in 2006. She's been had quite a few different studios that she's worked for, but Jail Chihuly being one of the main full-time gigs that she's had there. And that is a great approach to glassmaking, and one of the things that she's learned from working in that studio is, Dale Chihuly is amazing. He has beautiful visions, but he doesn't really make a lot of the work himself anymore. He hires talented people to be able to bring his visions to life. And so she has kind of grown up in that network of glassmaking and really learned to command a team and understand how to take the talents and the strengths of the team that you're working with to be able to create the objects and the things that you want to make. So she's had great support and inspiration from that team out there, and she's had nothing but good and beautiful things to say throughout her visit here about that team. So we've got our eyeballs already. We've got our face. Now Chris is working on what will be the feet. You want another door? Are you all right? Okay. So earlier today, I had an opportunity to play around with making claw feet. So Morgan gave me a picture this morning. She says, I really love these kind of talons feet, the ball feet that you'll see on those classic tubs. And while she might normally cold work things together, we're actually going to attach these hot today. I know I started at the beginning, said she likes to make a lot of components, but today we're going to assemble it hot. What you need? So we made, I made 4 of them. There's actually 5 of them because the first one I made didn't look very good and it was not the right size. So I made a couple more, but we've got 4 of them hiding in the garage over there. And they are all clear, but once we attach them, once these get to room temperature, she's going to take them back to Seattle and gild the surface of these feet with silver foil, or maybe gold, she said. This one's going to be gold, yeah. So it'll, platinum, she said, yeah, platinum. She spends money like she has money, she says, multiple times. But yeah, it's a beautiful way of bringing that metallic look to the surface and being able to control where those metallic surfaces are. So the razor blade that she made her first day, and I know she mentioned that as being one of her telltale signature pieces, this is sheets of silver foil on the surface. Now we did this one hot, and she gilded it hot and then sprinkled a little red powder over the surface to create kind of a rusty effect out of that glass. But so we're going to put these claw feet hot assembly today, and then gild them with that beautiful gold. And then there'll be some other components that we won't be able to add hot today just because of the limited time as well. But that's going to be some soap bubbles that will come around the rim. The small version that she made on the show had these really beautiful little sparkly bubbles that were all over it like soap. And so we were playing around with making big hollow bubbles for this. And so she's going to assemble those and be able to attach them later. So there we go, sticking one foot on there. All right, so there's one claw foot. So Chris, again, we made these claw feet. We put them into our garage, and our garage is essentially a glass babysitter. So we can put parts and components in there, keep them at just the right temperature so nothing's melting and nothing's cracking as long as everything goes well. And when we're ready to pull things from that garage, there's kind of a hot side and a cold side. There's only a few degrees difference, but it's about 1,020 degrees in there. So we're going to take a punty, stick it to the claw foot, and then bring it over in front of the furnace, get it warm, and then he'll start building heat back into that piece, and then they heated just the bottom of that foot, or I guess the top of the foot, so that it can be stuck and melted into the surface. So we had some questions online. Thank you for adding those in. They asked what kind of glue that we use for assembling glass. Now, the two main glues that I'm familiar with and most glass blowers will work with are either UV glue or Hextol. Is there anything that you use beyond that? M31, a medical glue. Okay, that one I haven't used. I don't do a lot of gluing of glass in my own glass practice, so I think there's been a few newer things under the sun since I've done a lot of that. But generally, Hextol is a very, very popular glue. It is actually a two-part epoxy that you have to mix the parts just in the right proportions, and then it's a really slow-setting glue. So you have to set up just the right conditions. It can fill gaps, so if you have, and it's very optically clear. It can be ground and polished, so it becomes a really lovely glue for attaching components or mixed media together as well. UV glues tend to be just a one-part glue that will react to black lights and be able to, or the sunshine, and it will set up in a very short amount of time, but they're typically not filler glues. So if you had a small gap or something, you really have to have perfect matching, and they also have to be transparent glass that the light can penetrate through. So while they're great for quick and immediate, they're not really a great lasting archival version typically, depending on the piece. The second question that we had online was how to get started in glassmaking. Awesome. So I would suggest the thing about glass is that it's not something that you can typically do in your family room, right? You have to have a hot shop. You have to have all this equipment and everything. So it's very rare for people to own their own hot shops. So typically glass artists will end up, unless you're working production and you really have a whole business going, most glass workers will just gain access in a public access studio, kind of like we have here at the Corning Museum of Glass. The studio of the Corning Museum of Glass has classes, has workshops, and rental facilities for professional glass blowers to be able to make a lot of their work. So I would suggest that you come here to the Corning Museum of Glass and take a class. That's a great way to start. But if we're not anywhere close or you don't feel like coming to us, there are public access studios all around the country, all over the world, that teach classes and workshops and just really give you an introduction all the way to advanced approach to glassmaking. Now, on a more approachable scale is flame working. Flame working, you can buy a torch, you can set it up in your garage, make sure you have good ventilation because it's both gas and oxygen, so you want to have a nice ventilated space, but it's a much smaller approach. You can kind of set it up in your home as long as you have the local authorities allow such activities in your private home. But you can end up buying a torch, end up making beads, small objects out of glass, and it all works the same. It all kind of is the approaches. You learn the basics of glassmaking. So that's a really great way to start, just making beads on a simple torch. You can even buy, you don't even have to buy the fancy versions that we have here, even just there's like hot head torches. It's just a head that you put onto a MAP gas torch. So really low tech and a great way to get it started. A lot of contemporary glassworkers are also learning in universities. So there's a handful of high schools around the country and a little over 50 universities that have glass blowing as a major. So you can do a Bachelor of Fine Arts or Material Studies. It kind of depends on the university and what their program structure is. But you can go to university for a 4-year degree or to graduate school. So they also have a graduate level in glassmaking as well. So that's another contemporary way, because historically, mostly glass was done in factories, and it was a very limited activity. You had to be a glass blower in the factory to be able to have access to that material. But this contemporary studio glass movement that started kind of really hit its stride in the late 60s, early 70s, that is when few artists got together and decided, well, we want to play with glass too. We don't want to work in a factory. So they started building small furnaces, private studios, public access studios, and that's where we start to see those university programs building as well. And so all of that has led to exactly what we have here. A bunch of artists working in a space that's not really producing products on a regular basis. We're really hosting guest artists and really demonstrating on a daily basis to show you this wonderful material and all of its possibilities. So here we go with a second foot. Squish. So you really need to have the surface of that glass nice and hot to get it to stick. Let's give him a little round of applause. We haven't given any appreciation lately, and this is some really great teamwork coming together for this piece. So, you know, the timing, the temperature, the teamwork, the tenacity, it all comes into place to make a piece like this come together. So Morgan has a keen eye on all aspects of what's happening in this piece as well. Got your door. So cute. All right, so we got 2 more feet to add. And luckily, we're going to stick with it till the end. I know online it said it was only from 3 to 4, but we're going to stick with it until we're finished. Absolutely. And for those of you who are here in person, or if you're really online and you're loving what you see and you might have missed something, we will eventually have this up on our YouTube channel. And our YouTube channel of the Corning Museum of Glass has thousands of hours of glass blowing and demonstrations. And we do have quite a few featured artists from Blown Away that we've invited here over the past 4 seasons. So you can check on past winners as well. But lots of opportunity to see. It usually takes us, you know, about a week or so to make sure that the video is edited, and then we also wait for the piece to come out of the oven, and we have an image of that piece at the end of the video or the beginning, depending on how they structure it. But you will get to see a final version of this once it comes out of the oven. We'll also be posting things onto our social media as well. We've been doing daily updates. And so you can kind of look back and see some of the other work and adventures that Morgan has had here during her week. Part of the prize package for winning Blown Away is a week-long residency here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And Morgan's on Friday, but we got Saturday. So we got 1 more day to make pieces with her tomorrow. And I think what we're going to focus on tomorrow are a large egg, because those eggs, they're kind of designed after or modeled after Fabergé eggs, but the beautiful ornate eggs, and they come in a little stand. So she takes and makes big, beautiful eggs with lots of color on the surface, and then she'll grind through that surface, engraving it into a beautiful portrait or a cameo-style portrait. And so they can have hundreds of hours of cold working to get all the details of that beautiful cameo in the cold shop. Once again, it's not a hot process. But we'll be making some blanks for her tomorrow. And then she was collaborating as well with Ryan, and he's going to be making a beautiful stand and finial for the egg, which is a little bit different. She does, I guess most of yours has a stand of some sort, yeah. But they're going to do a little collaboration, and Ryan is also a contestant from Blown Away and was down in the final challenge, and they're just good friends and wanted to collaborate once again. So he was here yesterday doing the Blown Away Day, and he's sticking around to help out do a very special collaboration with Morgan tomorrow. So how are we doing on questions? Any other curiosities? You got some online? The biggest piece that Morgan has ever made? I know in general Morgan doesn't like to make huge work personally, but she works on the Chihuly team, and they make ginormous things all of the time. So some of these, probably those eggs are probably some of the bigger things that you've made. Yeah, that's really Morgan's approach to, is more of an installation approach, where she'll make lots of parts and make a huge installation that would take up a big room, just like the final presentation she made for Blown Away. It wasn't just one or two pieces that were huge, it took up a lot of space and had a lot of content in it. And so yes, a lot of what she does isn't the biggest things, it's all the important things, it's the details. Big doesn't necessarily make better, so it's really the vision behind it that really brings a piece to the heart of it. But yeah, I've seen even this bathtub, you know, the original one was really small. This is maybe the biggest bathtub she's made so far. There's also a really fun kind of trompe-l'oeil to some of her work if you check out her website. Yesterday we made some lighter bodies, and so she's made lighters and other pills and pill bottles, and they're all ginormous. But if you see it in an image, you would think it was a regular size thing, because she figured out the perfect proportions, the perfect colors, all the details that come together. But then there's some really great image on her website that's her standing in the space, and then you realize these things are huge. So it's a real challenge to scale up an everyday recognizable object and have it still read as that object and play with the eye in that manner. And she's really, really good at that. I'm sorry? How much does it weigh? The feet? Each foot is probably only maybe 2 pounds of glass. They're not that heavy. There's 4 of them. About 2 pounds, 2 or 3 pounds. So yeah, it is really increasing the weight. That's why we pulled the big guns out here. Tom Ryder. He's not struggling. Yeah. You see that little wiggle they did? They're really trying to make sure that those are seated beautifully onto the surface. All right, so we've got one more of these feet to add. And we were just talking about proportions, you know. When we started the day, we kind of had an estimate of the sizes, but this is the first time that she's ever put feet onto a tub when it's hot. So, you know, I wasn't quite sure what size to make. I was trying to make them all the same size at least, but adding them on, whether they should be bigger or smaller, those are kind of fun things that you really don't know until you assemble a thing together to see how it all works together. One of the really nice things about this studio as well, you were talking about different equipment and things that are here to offer. You might notice that there is a yoke, this resting place that we put that pipe on, and we've got rails all the way out to the to the bench. So as he is coming in and out of that heating chamber, he knows that that will stay in a nice straight place, and he can kind of move it back and forth. He comes all the way out and close to the bench, so that's just a little bit of a lift from one to the other, as opposed to picking it up and then carrying it all the way to the bench from far away. So these are the subtle little techniques that he has learned as a gaffer to take care of himself, to take care of his body, to make this less stressful as an action. And really puts it in just the perfect place for Morgan to be able to access. When you start scaling up on the size of things, it really does make the process a lot more complicated, just sheer weight of the material. Even if you are strong and you can keep things turning, as soon as it gets a little off center and you have to torque it all the way back onto center, that takes so much more energy to do that than just to maintain and keep it simple. So when you start to do sculptural work especially, very often those sculptures are not an even distribution of weight as you're playing with them. And you need to keep things in just the right positions as you're building that to keep it in place. But this is kind of a nice, concise, rounded, semi-rounded form. That one, the balance is pretty good. But we like to say we employ a lot of massage therapists and chiropractors as glass blowers. A lot of body work, a lot of working out, stretching. A lot of gaffers or a lot of glass blowers end up with, repetitive stress injuries that would be on your wrists or your shoulders, your elbows, your back. So we got to take good care of ourselves. So as they're assembling this together, each part needs to be just the right temperature for it to survive. And so we're using that reheating chamber to keep things nice and hot, but we often gravitate towards that fluffy torch to help rebalance temperatures. So anything that's kind of away from center and small and delicate is going to want to cool down really quickly. But it also would want to heat up really quickly. So if Tom stays in that furnace too long, then those delicate parts could start to collapse and move. So he's got to find that balance where he's keeping everything at just the right temperature, but not getting anything hot or cold. So using torches to rebalance while you're making or to give a little insurance on things can be really important. And I think once we get all 4 of these feet, I tried to measure them pretty close to each other, but we're kind of pushing and squishing, so there's a little bit of irregularity on the height, and they're on the curve of the tub itself. So when we finish getting all 4 of them on there, then we're going to hold it straight up and down on a flat surface and kind of recenter all those feet to make sure that the final tub will stand in a nice, proud way. That's one of the tricky things when you're blowing glass, is to look at angles and making sure things are level, that they will sit level eventually on the table or on the display. And when you're seated at the bench and you're making a vessel, you can kind of sight down the profile of the piece as it spins. And as soon as you see that profile kind of wiggling around, you know that, well, there's a high spot, there's a low spot, I need to rebalance that. But when you're working with sculpture and all the different parts and pieces, sometimes that can be a little bit harder to visualize where center is. So you notice how she's even pulled the tool deck away from the bench so she can stand behind it, get a good view, get the torch in the right place. So every time Chris pulls one of these feet out of that garage, he gives it a few flashes of heat, and then he starts to use that hot torch to spot heat the very bottom where it's going to connect. So we can use the hot torch to make sure that only that area is hot and will squish, and the rest of the shape will not move when we go to attach it. Chris has over 25 years of glassmaking experience, so he's really familiar with this particular glass and glass in general. So a great technical support for Morgan. So sticking it down, line it up. A little bit of water or cold steel just helps break that out. That's some beautiful teamwork. Very nice. All right, so we're going to put a kiln shelf on the floor on a couple bricks so it's not all the way on the floor. But this kiln shelf will warm that up a little bit so that we can drop the piece down onto that and help rebalance it. But we don't want to put it on cold metal. We don't want to put it on the cold floor. That could end up shocking the glass. So since we are coming in on kind of the final few moments of our show here, I want to just thank everyone for coming here today, and I want to give a shout out to our team. We've got Morgan Peterson, of course, as the winner of Blown Away. She's here in her residency program. I got one more day of her residency. She's been making a lot of fun and amazing pieces with our team here. Tom Ryder is the heavy lifter here today, working with Morgan, and we are the three people that helped her at Blown Away as well. So we kind of got the band back together to be able to be with Morgan this week. Chris Rochelle as well as the technical advisor here today and doing some great work. My name's Helen Tegler, of course, being on the microphone. And then online, Brady has been helping out, answering all your questions online. Alexis has been getting some great close-up shots, great views of the action here today, doing all the filming and everything. We've got Olivia Dobkin. She joined Morgan for the week as a very generous support of not only glass blowing, but also social media. She's kind of double tagging right now. I got the phone in the hand and the door opener in the other. So she's multitasking. The amazing Olivia, thanks so much. And I believe we've got Dan up in the booth here today. So thanks for moving the cameras around, getting the good actions, getting everything in place. Kelsey's also here. She's one of our social media directors. She's really taking and documenting a lot of the action that we're doing and responsible for some of that online content that you see. But we've got a great team assembled here today. And glass blowing, this is something that Morgan was talking last night in our Connected by Glass event, that you can never look at glass making as being an individual experience. The individual artist can only do so much. It really takes a village to make all of these dreams come true. So assembling the right team with just the right skills, being able to take advantage of everyone's strengths to bring your vision to life. It's a really difficult thing to do completely solo. So we're really grateful that Morgan has been as trusting and gifting us with this time to help her make these beautiful, fun pieces. So they're kind of setting up temperature. There's a concern that if you get those sections too hot and go down onto that kiln shelf, they'll create flat spots, right? So we're wanting it to be equal and have the right spacing, but we don't want to create any dents in that object. To avoid any thermal shock or breaking, we're using wooden paddles to help guide them into place. Now we do have the two different kinds of torches here. One torch runs on both gas and oxygen, so it burns at nearly 5,000 degrees. It will melt glass instantly and get really, really hot. But this torch here, that's what we call the fluffy. It's just propane. And so it's not going to really melt the glass, but it'll get it hot. It'll start to soften it slightly and keep it warm. So I call it our insurance heater, really. It gives a little heat where we need it, like on the jack line and other areas, and can give a soft heat to help guide things into place. That's a great view. You can even see the flame that's happening in that reheating chamber. So even the reheating chamber itself is considered a tool. It has flame in one area, so you can kind of guide your pieces into that flame even as you're working to be able to heat things in just the right way. Now we saw Morgan use a big set of corks at the very beginning to flatten that big white bubble into that oval shape that we want for the bathtub. So she's going to use some corks to help guide those pieces, the legs, into place as well. Cork is a really soft material. It's not going to leave tool marks if she's gentle and kind of keeps it moving. So it's a very popular tool for glass making. All right, lining it up. Yeah, it looks good this direction. Sweet. That was easy. Nice job, nice job. So there probably was just a little bit of stuff. She's just using a torch to smooth out that little area. Now, again, for those of you who might have missed this at the beginning, this piece is going to be removed from this blowpipe and then brought into the cold shop. And we're going to cut off the top and make it into a nice curve, so it'll have that beautiful curve that you'd see in a clawfoot tub. And then these clear feet are also going to be gilded with gold. So it'll end up having gold feet, and we'll add bubbles, kind of luminescent bubbles to look like soap. And then she also wants to make, some handles and a little spout, a dragon spout that's also made of gold. So lots of additions that will be added to this piece in the future. And some of those parts still have yet to be made. But this will end up being a much larger assembled sculpture in the end. So that's a perfect reason to keep hold of her social media and website so you can see all these things coming together. We've made so many parts and pieces for her to take home and play with. She's got thousands of hours of cold working and all kinds of processes, some of which she does herself. All the beautiful portraits and engraving that you see on her work online, that is all things that she does her own for herself. But some of the basic cold working and the curve, she might end up hiring out. She's got a dedicated cold worker that she likes to work with. And again, another way of approaching creative work, you don't necessarily have to make everything yourself. When you hire professionals, you get the nicest version of something. So any metalworking, cold working, other things that might not be the best use of her creative time can be farmed out to other people and help support their living as a glassmaker and artisan as well. So I think we've got all of our parts. Everything's in just the right place. Chris has already decorated himself with his protective gear, which tells me we're getting ready to load this into the annealing oven for that slow cooling process. This piece will take at least overnight with those nice thick claw feet. We might give it a little extra time to avoid any breaking. Our glass shrinks just a little bit as it cools, so if it expands and contracts too much as it heats and it cools, you can end up not having things survive. So we want to make sure that it's going nice and slow. So Chris is going to get under that piece. We put a little bit of water right on the punty, or right on that jack line, rather. This will cause a small crack to form right along that piece. And a light tap is all it takes. There's our beautiful bathtub. Away in the oven it goes. Stands perfectly straight. Fantastic job, Morgan Peterson and the team. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, we want to thank everyone, both in-house here at the Corning Museum of Glass and online. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, the final piece will be, at least an image of what we have so far, will be at the end of this video and on our social media. So thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to see you here sometime soon here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Have a great evening, everyone.